Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So we're going to continue with our class on fiqh, particularly al-fiqh al-Maliki. And we have been reading from the book al-Muhadhdhab min al-fiqh al-Maliki wa adillatuhu, Shaykh Muhammad Sukhal al-Majjājī hafidhahullah. So we've been reading from a particular book that is designed, it's called al-Muhadhdhab, right, which means to prune or to trim, min al-fiqh al-Maliki, the pruning of Mālikī Fiqh, also then wa adillatuhu, meaning also then based upon its proofs. So this book that was written by Shaykh al-Majjājī hafidhahullah, he's an Algerian scholar, and again his work, I think it's 3 volumes, and this work was designed for particularly introducing people to the study of fiqh, particularly fiqh al-Maliki, right? Mālikī Fiqh. So it's designed for the beginner, because some of the books of fiqh, particularly in our madhab, I mean, there are some beginning ones like al-Akhdari and others, but that's not really like a complete work. And then obviously like Khalil, his, like some of the other major works, they're like encyclopedias. They're like, like Bahar. They're these huge works, and that's very difficult for the beginning student. Plus, throughout the years, there's a lot of istilaha, like a lot of mustalahat, a lot of technical terms that will be sometimes difficult for the beginner to understand. And so Shaykh al-Majjājī has trimmed or pruned a lot of the unnecessary things for the beginner. Now, later in the intermediate and advanced student in fiqh, alhamdulillah, we go to those the kutub mu'tamida, we go to those relied upon works. But for the beginner, this is not necessary. And also, there are some people that once they learn the basics, that's it. They will not go to those advanced things. And so this is also designed for like a new Muslim. How do I worship Allah? How do I do the different ibadat, the different acts of worship in a very simple, concise way? And as the book says, wa adillatuhu, right, with its proofs, meaning that we don't just say, well, we do it like this, or we do prayer like that, or we do it like this or that, without any proofs. There will be adillah, there will be proofs based upon what? Aqwal al-Nabi alayhi salatu, words or statements or ahadith from the Prophet sallallahu, or from athar, or different statements from like the companions and such. And so that's the structure of the book. So in today, inshallah, we're going to start with the bab of Ṣalāh. We've completed now the bab of Tahara. We completed the chapters on purification, and we talked about the awqat of Ṣalāh. We talked about the times of the prayer. Now we're going to talk about getting more specifically to what does the prayer look like. So, مثلا, اسم الباب باب صفة الصلاة. So, for instance, today we're going to be opening up what he has titled the chapter about the sifa, or the characteristics or the description of prayer, صفة الصلاة. And so he begins أركان الصلاة 15 ركعا. So it's important to know that the salah in Islam, the prayer in Islam, it has 15 what we call rukn, or different arkan, like different pillars. And I see I actually have a typo here. I always have a typo. So for those online, that's a noon, not an ayn. Okay, so we have 15 essential components that comprise the salah. So we'll begin with the first one, an-niyyah. An-niyyah. So the first important component of prayer is to have the intention to make prayer. Now, this doesn't have to be an intention, niyyah yani jahratan. It doesn't have to be spoken out loud, like I am going to now pray dhuhr, No, this is not necessary. But you just need to have, fi qalbik, like, in your heart, you have the intention to go pray. ثانيا, the second one, وتكبير الإحرام. So the initial Allahu Akbar, right? The initial takbir to go into the hal or the state of ihram. Ihram is related to the word haram, right? Because when we say a thing is haram, sometimes it can be sacred, right? So in English, we could say like hurma, right? Something is sacred. But also with things that are haram, there's a restriction. So likewise, once you say the takbir of ihram, you are now in a restricted state, meaning there's things you can do and there's things you cannot do. There's things you should be doing and there's things you should not be doing. So that's number two. الثالث القيام لها. So you have to stand for that. So that's one of the ihram is the second, the takbir ihram. The third is the qiyam, standing. So Allahu Akbar. والرابع قراءة الفاتحة. The fourth is the reciting of Surah Al-Fatiha. It is a rukn of the Salah, not a fadila or a sunnah, but a rukn, meaning you must recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Al-Khamis al-Qiyam laha. So likewise, you'll be standing, for doing that. Wal-Ruku' al-Sadis. So then the sixth is to bow, right? The action of bowing after the Fatiha. Wal-Sabi', right? The seventh one is going to be al-Ruf'u minhu, right? So then once you make your ruku' when you're in your bow, when you come back up from that, right? That is the seventh. Wal-Thamin as-Sujud. And I have another typo. I have lots of typos. As-Sujud. So 8 is going to be prostrating, the sajda. 9, at-Tasi' is going to be al-Raf'u minhu. Once you're in the prostration, right, you have to come back up, right? You're rising from that. That's 9. Wal-Ashar is going to be al-Julus bayn as-Sajdatayn. So likewise, once you make your prostration, you have to come to a sitting point, right? That's going to be a sajda. Then you make sajda again, and then you come back to a sitting position. So this is the important part. Sometimes we think, okay, when you praying and you go down to make the first prostration, the first sajda, you think, you're doing your first sajda, then you come to a jalsa, you come to your sitting position, and then you make your sajda again. This is an important distinction of prayer according to the Malikis. It's not that you just immediately rise up, but there is also julus, right? So al-julus bayn as-sajdatayn. So it's important that after the second sajda, the second prostration, you also come to a seated position. You don't go from sajda and stand immediately up. Al-i'tidal. Now this is the ashar, right? The 11th point here is something we call al-i'tidal. It's related to the word adal. You might know the word adal in Arabic is justice. Justice is what to treat things or people fairly or equally. So the idea of i'tidal is that for every single movement, right, every single haraka or every single maqam, every single stage in the prayer, you give it its time and its movement and its space. So you don't rush through things, and you're not also, taking your time with the Fatiha, but then you rush through the sajda. And we see this sometimes. People, they recite Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman, and then, Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, right? And Sami Allahu liman hamida. And then when they go to sajda, boom, boom, they're like a dajjaja, they're like a chicken pecking at the ground. right? So every single haraka, every single movement in the salah, alayhi what? Al-i'tidal. You have to do it evenly. Ithna ashar, right? The 12th one is what? Tuma'nina. At tuma'nina. So itma'inna and tuma'nina are related. You might know itma'inna. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innu al-qulub. Right? Allah says, for instance, in Surah Ar-Ra'd, do not hearts come to rest by the remembrance of Allah. Coming to rest, tuma'nina, is one of the characteristics of prayer. So again, when you go to ruku', it shouldn't be like ruku' and then right up. No, when you go into ruku', right? Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbil A'la, right? You go and you say that and you take your time and you pause. And then you come up from that, Sami Allahu liman hamidah, Rabbana lakal hamd. And then you go down to your sajda, you make your sajda and your tasbih and the sajda, and then you come up to your sitting position and you what? Tuma'nina. And then you make your sajda again, you make your tasbih, and then you come back up to the sitting position, tuma'nina, and then you stand up. Right? And so al-julus lahu, then after that characteristic, what finally we get to what? As-salam. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, making the taslim. Wal-jalus lahu. So obviously sitting while you do that. And then the 15th thing that he mentions is what? At-targhib. You do things in order. Right? You do things in their essential order. So you don't, begin with Fatiha, go down and make sajda, then come up and make ruku', and you don't do things out of order. You do them sequentially in the order that they're supposed to be done. He says, حفظه الله الأصل في معرفة الأركان المذكورة فعله عليه الصلاة والسلام الذي يقع بيانا لقوله تعالى وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة من سورة البقرة. So he says, right, the fundamental principle in identifying those mentioned pillars, the ones we just went over, are from the actions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that serve as an illustration, right, for that. From that, and then they're taken, right? So Allah gave the command, wa aqimu salah wa atu zakah, pray and purify your wealth, pay zakah. Right? How will we know the kayfiyya of that? How to do it? By what? يقع بيان لقوله تعالى صلى الله عليه وسلم من أفعال نبيه عليه الصلاة والسلام, from the way that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم did it. So likewise, وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم, right? The Prophet also said in authentic hadith, صلوا كما رأيتموني أصلي. Pray as you see me pray. And he says, وأخرجه البخاري عن مالك ابن الحويرث. So this is Imam al-Bukhari in his collection of Sahih relates this particular hadith, pray as you see me pray. وقد وصف عدد من الصحابة, likewise a great number of many of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ have also described the prayer of the Prophet ﷺ, right? وصف صلاته عليه الصلاة والسلام منهم ابن عمر عائشة أبو حميد الساعدي ووائل ابن حجر وأبو هريرة وغيرهم رضي الله عنهم جميعا. So a great many of them, amongst more notables would be, for instance, Ibn Umar, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Aisha, Humayd ibn al-Sa'di, Wa'il ibn al-Hajr, Abu Huraira. So many great Sahabi are well known to have described this in detail, the prayer of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. وبين النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المسيء صلاته أركان الصلاة. So there was an incident where a man was praying incorrectly, his prayer, and was not doing all of the pillars correctly. أو معظمها, or the majority of them. And so the Prophet ﷺ then corrects him. So Rawahu Abu Huraira, this is related according to Abu Huraira, أنه قال له عليه الصلاة والسلام, in which the Prophet said to the men, إذا قمت إلى الصلاة فاسبغ الوضوء. So when you get ready to pray, when you stand for the prayer, first off, make sure you complete your wudu properly so that you have tahara. You're in a state of purification. ثم استقبل القبلة, then face the qibla. فكبر, then make the takbir of ihram, right? Allahu Akbar. ثم اقرأ ما تيسر معك من القرآن, then recite whatever is easy for you from the Quran. ثم اركع حتى تطمئن, then you make a ruku' until you come to a resting point. راكعا, right? So you make your ruku' and you have a pausing or a resting moment before you move on from the ruku', from the bowing. واركع حتى تعتدل قائما, then you complete your ruku' and you come to a standing position. ثم اسجدوا حتى تطمئن ساجدا, then you make your sajda, likewise with a pausing in it that we had mentioned before. ثم اركع حتى تطمئن جالسا, likewise you make your sitting position with a pausing. ثم اسجد حتى تطمئن ساجدا, then you make your sajda again with a pause. ثم افعل ذلك في صلاتك كلها, and do this in your prayer for every raka'ah like this. So meaning what? We have an established proof from the Prophet ﷺ of how the prayer is to be performed and completed. أخرجه الشيخان, and of course Imam Muslim and Imam al-Bukhari rahimahuma Allah, they relate this. But he says, وَهَذَا اللَّفْظ al-Bukhari, this particular articulation is the one taken from Imam al-Bukhari. Continuing, he says, عن عبادة ibn الصامت, and then also according to the great Sahabi, عبادة ibn الصامت رضي الله عنه, قال رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام, the Prophet said, what? لا صلاة لمن لم يقرأ بأم القرآن. So now we're going to talk about the importance of reciting al-Fatiha, right? So he said, alayhi salatu, the Prophet said, what? There is no prayer for the one that does not recite the opening of the book, yani Surah al-Fatiha. So a quick word about this. This is why learning tajweed, I'm not talking about doing all this affectation and reciting with maqamat and majawwid. This is something else. I'm talking about learning the ahkam of the makharij of the huruf Arabiya, like learning how to pronounce the Arabic letters correctly, learning the correct rules of the rules of tajweed. Because likewise, la sihhata kama la sihhata fatiha la sihhata fi salah. In the same way that there is no prayer without the Fatiha, right? There can be no solidness of prayer, no soundness of prayer, if a person's reciting of Al-Fatiha has mistakes. And I'm saying this because there are some people that do make mistakes in their Fatiha. And so one time, this is way back when I was Imam at the Rancho Masjid. And normally I would lead the prayer, but I was running late, and so I had to make wudu. So by the time I came into the musalla, they were just beginning. Somebody, started to lead the prayer. And the person leading the prayer was a person that unfortunately did not really know how to properly recite the Quran. And so when he got to the end part of Surah Al-Fatiha, he said, "Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين." Now, there are some differences amongst the qira'at and riwayat of qira'ah in the Quran. There are some differences in the Quran of how you can recite the Quran, and some of them will be strange to some people if they're not familiar with them all. Like, so for instance, in the qira'ah of Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. وهذا صحيح. هذه قراءة صحيحة. This is a sound way of reciting the Quran in the particular qira'ah of Ibn Kathir, not the Mufassir. When people hear the word Ibn Kathir, they think of the Mufassir. No. We're talking about Al-Qari, Qari Mecca. This is the Qari of Mecca, who is the founder of one of the major 7 mutawatir qira'at of the Quran. Indisputably sound recitations of the Quran. And one of the hukam, right, one of the rules is when you have the damir al-jama' mudhakkar, when you have the pronoun of the plural third person masculine in Arabic, this is hum. So غير المغضوب عليهم, him or hum, ولا الضالين. So in the qira'ah of Ibn Kathir, hum or him, right, depending on if it's marfu or majroor, right, there's a wow, an extra wow after the meme. So instead of غير المغضوب عليهم, غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Alhamdulillah. Tamam, la ba'as. Now, maghdub and wala dalin. In some of the, we can say the ammiya, in some of the colloquial dialects of some of the Arabs, and even of some of the Ajam, of the non-Arabs, they will pronounce the dad as a zay. This is a mistake, right? This is not acceptable. In regular speech, right? Fi kalam, fine. So you might, like if you're from Egypt, they will say like a person who is zalim. That person, he's a zalim, he's an oppressor. And they will pronounce the dha as like a zay. This is fine for colloquial speech. This is not acceptable for salah. And so there is a zirat al-mustaqim. There is a zirat al-mustaqim for some of the qira'ah, right? So you have sirat. This can become like bayn al-sad wa zay. Zirat al-ladina alamta alayhimu, zirat al-ladina alamta alayhum. And this is from Khalaf, another one of the riwayat, but this one is actually from the mashhurat. It's mashhur. It's not from the mutawatir, but it's still acceptable for prayer. It's not very common though. You will very rarely hear this unless the person is like more either a person who's very adept at reciting, that has learned one of these, because it's very uncommon. A few parts of the world, like in certain parts of East Africa, they will recite, and Imam Hamza in his qira'ah, particularly of his talmid, of his student Khalaf. And so you have ihdinas zirat al-mustaqim, zirat. But most people, they will recite in what is known as the riwayah of Imam Asim. I mean, in the qira'ah of Imam Asim, in the riwayah or in the particular transmission of one of his students, Imam Hafs. Sometimes we are Hafs and Asim. Imam Hafs is one of the students of Imam Asim. The other is Shu'bah, which almost nobody knows. And in this common way, right, then it's sirat, sad, sirat alladina anamta alayhim ghayr al-maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. There's no zalin. This is not from any of the qira'at to pronounce ad-dalin as zalin in the prayer. Like you have people from Pakistan, they don't say Ramadan, they say Ramzan. Okay, fine. You can say Ramzan if you're just talking. But if you're reciting the prayer, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن, right? The month of Ramadan is the one in which the Quran, if you are reciting that verse in your prayer, you cannot say شهر رمضان الذي أنزل. No, خطأ. The difference would be because the qira'ah of Quran after the Fatiha is not wajib. It is merely a sunnah, or it's a fadila. It's something considered meritorious and extra. It would be something we could still needs to be corrected, but it can be overlooked. Whereas the Fatiha, if to do this, you have made the recitation of Fatiha incorrect. And if the Fatiha is not correct, then there's no prayer without the Fatiha, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So I remember that day, and people got quite upset. And I didn't do it to embarrass the person. Alhamdulillah, I'm sure they had good intentions. But because they recited it that way after the prayer was over, I said, unfortunately, we're going to repeat this prayer because this is not sound. Because he made the taslim, he didn't make sahu or anything. I said, no. We have to repeat this prayer. So anyway, the point is, the recitation of Fatiha is critical to the soundness of the prayer, because the Prophet ﷺ said, لا صلاة لمن لم يقرأ بأم القرآن. There's no prayer for the one that doesn't recite it. وقال أيضا عليه الصلاة والسلام, he also said, وَالْمِفْتَحَ الصَّلَاةِ الطُّهُورِ. Right, he said the key to prayer is having tahara. So be very careful when you make your wudu. As he said, asbigh, right? Make sure it's complete in sound. وَتَحْرِيمُهَا التَّكْبِيرِ. Right? The reverence and the sanctity of the prayer is from the takbir of ihram. وَتَحْلِيلُهَا is the starim. And the releasing of the prayer is to say the salam at the end. And this is something that is reported, for instance, in the Sunan, like Sunan Ibn Majah at Tirmidhi, except for Ada and Nisa'i. And Nisa'i says no, but at Tirmidhi says, in addition, قال الترمذي هذا أصح شيء في هذا الباب وأحسنه. He said this is actually the best statement in this particular chapter on this in the books, and the most sound. Now, Aisha, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, may Allah be pleased with her, said, قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يستفتح الصلاة بالتكبير. So the Prophet ﷺ used to begin to open the prayer by making takbir. والقراءة ب الحمد لله رب العالمين. So this is important because there are some differences. Now there are, again, because the Maliki Madhhab is not as common unless you're from a country where it's more like, say, Morocco, Algeria, Libya. But many places it's just not as well known and is dominated mainly by the madhab of Abu Hanifa, or secondarily Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah. And then, of course, like in places like in the Khalij, where you have some of Imam Ahmad's madhab. But for us, as Malikis, it is to begin the prayer straight off. Takbir al-Ihram, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. The dua that is often made before, some people find to say, wow, man, like, how did you make that dua so fast? You made the takbir and you just started reciting. Because I didn't make the dua. For us, we go right to the prayer. Also, and again, this is just an opinion, some of the Sahaba considered in Surah Al-Fatiha, some considered the Basmala al-Ayat al-Ula. Some of them considered to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim as literally the first ayah of Surah Al-Fatiha, where others did not. And so, for instance, many of the Sahaba did not, and of course, many of the Tabi'een, like when you get to, like, Imam Malik, did not consider it. And so that's why we begin Bismillahir, we begin just Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen without saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. But again, these are not things that should cause argumentation. These are not things that should divide people. But understand, if a person begins without it, obviously, alhamdulillah, we have our proofs, right? The adillah, right? That these things are permissible. وكان إذا ركع لم يشخص رأسه ولم يصوبه. And that the Prophet ﷺ, when he bowed, he didn't raise his head nor he lowered it. Meaning that if he was, when he went into ruku', he wouldn't dip his head down or he wouldn't dip his head up, right? But he would look straight ahead. That's why some people, when they make ruku', they kind of look down. But based upon this description of the prayer by his wife, may Allah be pleased with her, it is to basically kind of look ahead. That's why the Malikis, for us, it is looking ahead, right? وَلَكِنْ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ, his head was kind of in between those two, between looking up and looking straight down, kind of looking somewhat straight ahead, meaning that it didn't attenuate his head on his neck when he did so. وكان إذا رفع من الركوع لم يسجد حتى يستوي قائما. And so that likewise, when the Prophet ﷺ, when he would make ruku', when he would bow, he would not go and make sajda until he had stood up completely from bowing. And this is where we get in the tuma'nina, right? Giving every movement its time to be completed and like a little bit of a pause, so it's not rushed through the prayer. وإذا رفع الرأس من السجدة لم يسجد حتى يستوي جالسا. Then likewise, when the Prophet ﷺ, after he completed rising up from that, then he would pray, he would make prostration, حتى يستوي جالسا. Then he would come to a sitting position. وكان يقول في كل ركعتين التحية. And then every single raka'atain, every 2 units of prayer, constituting 1 raka'ah, right? He would then say the beginning of what we understood to be of at-tashahhud. Why? What she says, at-tahiyyah, right? At-tahiyyatu lillahi ila akhiriha. وكان يفرش رجله اليسرى وينصب اليمنى. And this is hard to do. For some of us, like now I'm old, it's hard, right? But he would place, essentially, he would lay his left foot flat, and he would place his right foot under it. Now, that's the traditional way. Unfortunately, I do not have the greatest of flexibility, and I've been trying to work on this for years, to get it. But it's very hard. That's why you'll see in the traditional Maliki way, which unfortunately my legs don't cooperate, is to put that leg under the other, right? So and it requires some flexibility. That's why it's best to start doing that when you're young, because trying to do it now at an older age, it can take quite a bit to try to obtain that, versus sitting with both legs flat and you're kind of almost sitting on your heels. And we're going to get it. It's not that it's impermissible, but there are some proofs of where the Prophet ﷺ was teaching people to prohibit them from doing so. But again, nahi and tahrim, 2 different things. Prohibiting them from doing something, and then it's something that they would be punished for in the hereafter, right? Something else, especially if a person doesn't have the capacity to do so. So get into that. وَكَانَ يَنْهَى عَنْ عُقْبَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ. It called it like, he would also then prohibit people from squatting like the shaitan. Now, here, it's because some people had a way of almost like the way a dog sits. It's like they would squat down and they're almost like sitting on the backs of their legs, versus in a sitting position and sitting on your heels is a little bit different, right? So part of this has to do with what is described as this kind of squatting position. But yes, you should not be squatting. You should definitely be sitting. ونهى أن يفترش الرجال ذراعيه افتراش السبع. He also forbade people to spread out their arms like a bird of prey, meaning when they prayed as well. So you shouldn't going to extremes in your movements. They should be kept together. وَكَانَ يَخْتَمُ الصَّلَاةَ بِالتَّسْلِيمِ. And then of course he would finish his prayer by saying the taslim. And this is related, أخرجه Muslim. This is something related in Imam Muslim's collection. Now we're going to get to what Shaykh al-Majjājī calls فَصْلٌ فِي سُنَنِ الصَّلَاةِ. What are some details about the sunnah acts of the salah, which means these are not mandatory, but there is a reward for doing them. So he says, for instance, وَسُنَنُ الصَّلَاةِ قِرَاءَةُ شَيْءٍ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ بَعْدَ الْفَاتِحَةِ في الركعتين الأوليين. So it is a sunnah, not wajib, but a sunnah, and it's mu'akkada, very, very encouraged to do so, that after you recite al-Fatiha, if the prayer you're praying has let's say more than 2 raka'ah, then in the first 2 it is a sunnah to recite some Quran after the Fatiha. وَالسِّرْ فِيهَا يُسِرُّ فِيهِ. And so وَالْجَهْرُ فِيمَا يُجْهْرُ فِيهِ من القراءة. And so that applies if the prayer is a silent prayer, then you do that in the silent prayer. And likewise, if the prayer is one of the audible, out loud prayers, then likewise, you do that in the qira'ah and the reading of those. وَتَكْبِيرَ الْإِنْتِقَالِ. Also, saying the takbir when transitioning from the different positions, right? So obviously you have takbir al-ihram, right? But then when you get through with the Fatiha, or you get through with the other Quran, like you're in the first raka'ah or whatnot, when you get through with that, what Allahu Akbar before you go into ruku', right? It is a sunnah. It's from the sunnah. It's a sunnah to audibly say these things, right? In between the movements. وقال الإمام والمنفرد عند الرفع عند الركوع سمع الله لمن حمده. Right. So for also instance, when you are rising, from ruku', to say the phrase سمع الله لمن حمده, right? To say that, and then obviously للمأمون ربنا لك الحمد. If the person is, if you're particularly if behind the imam, to say ربنا لك الحمد. والتشهدان الأوسط والأخير, right? To then also say the first and then the last tashahhud, depending on where you're at in your, right? Is this from the, and so when she said the tahiyya, when Aisha said tahiyya in the hadith, and we're mentioning here now at tashahhud, that's because the beginning of the tashahhud has the tahiyya, tahiyyatu lillahi salawat, right? Then you go what? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammad, right? That part is a sunnah. The tahiyya is part of what's required. وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ, right? And then also to say upon the Prophet ﷺ, وَأَفْضَلُ الصِّغَهَا الصَّلَوَاتُ الْإِبْرَاهِيمِيَّةِ. And then likewise, اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم. Right, so that to also include the dua for the Prophet ﷺ, his family, and for Sayyidina Abraham, and his family. So that gives us a picture of one, what is required of the prayer. And then now we've begun to take a look at some of the sunnah acts. Next week, we're going to now look at some of the fada'il, right? Some of those things are a step below the sunnah, but still meritorious to do. Inshallah, we will look at some of those in next week's session. We're going to again take maybe a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll finish our quick reading of our hadith for this week from Sahih Muslim. وجزاكم الله خيرا وصلوات الله تعالى على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.